Happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Of course, Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery and what is the critical piece or pieces that help solve that mystery. And we've got a really interesting one for you guys today. Can a case be cracked with taxidermy? Let's find out. On May 23, 1952, local fisherman Bob Dingo was walking toward the Nerang River in Southport, Queensland, Australia, about to start his morning. The night's rain had finally stopped, and he could now go do some fishing. At just after 7 a.m., Bob saw a taxi sitting unattended under a fig tree in a no-parking zone just off the road. Thinking the cab driver was sleeping from the night before, he propped his rod and reel up against the cab and took a look inside. The morning sunlight didn't reveal any driver, but it did reveal a blood-spattered car interior. In a panic, he ran to the nearest telephone and called the Southport police. Officers arrived almost immediately and found that along with the physical evidence, the dashboard of the cab and upholstery had also been damaged by repeated blows of some type of heavy metal object. After calling the cab company, they found that this vehicle belonged to a 24-year-old man named Athol McCowan. Athol, a bachelor who had lived with his parents since his discharge from the Army just 4 years earlier, had never returned from his shift the night before. With all of the blood and physical evidence left in the car, they knew that Athol, at the very least, was seriously injured and needed medical attention. Now, they were in a race against time. Over the next 4 days, Detective Inspector Frank the Big Fella Bischoff interviewed dozens of potential witnesses. At 10 p.m., a local truck driver saw the taxi parked at a coastal lookout on nearby Currumbin Hill. 2 other witnesses saw the cab make a detour into a local RV park at 10:30 p.m. Another taxi driver and colleague of Athol's saw the taxi speeding away from an RV park. This man, however, didn't think Athol was the person who was driving. In the early morning hours, a homeless woman named Pretoria McPhail had tried to sleep in what she thought was just an abandoned cab at Southport Esplanade. Hoping to escape the night's rain, she settled down in the back seat to sleep. As she tried to get comfortable, her dog Boots began to bark frantically over a thin man in a hat and overcoat who walked quickly past the cab with his own dog running along beside him. Unnerved, she left the cab to find a safer spot for the night. In the darkness, she never saw the damage and blood inside the cab in the front area while she was trying to sleep in the back. Officers tracked down every customer Athol traveled with that night, all except for his final fare. This area typically saw few murders, and with the thought of a possible murderer running around free, Southport police were soon overwhelmed by offers from residents to help search for the victim. As volunteers searched the bush and beaches, fishermen searched waterways, and Army aircraft surveyed the coastline. Officers even used a giant magnet in local waterways, hoping to find the murder weapon. Finally, just over a week after he went missing, Athol's body washed up at low tide on a sandbank near Crib Island, north of Brisbane. Fully clothed, volunteers found him lying face down, arms and legs spread, with his wristwatch and wallet missing. Analysis showed that his body had traveled over 60 miles north from the spot his car had been found. An autopsy would show that the cause of death was due to injuries to the brain and multiple fractures to the skull made with a heavy metal object. Finally, investigators had a body, but they didn't have a suspect. With the public at the height of their frustration, a young detective constable was given a tip regarding a man named Fred Dale. Witnesses claimed that the day of the murder, Dale had been working in Southport. The morning after, he quickly drove out of town to Sydney, then reappeared in Brisbane looking nervous and wearing new clothes. Investigators were able to quickly find out that Fred Dale was an alias. The real man's name was Arthur Slim Halliday. Slim Halliday would turn out to be one of Australia's most notorious criminals. After leaving an orphanage in 1936 at the age of 15, Halliday worked as a sheep shearer, farmhand, and plumber while burglarizing houses, stealing cars, and writing hot checks. In 1939, he was sent to Bogo Road Jail to serve a 5-year sentence, but got into so much trouble during his stint that he ended up serving 10 years. Before the end of his criminal career, he would make 6 escape attempts, 2 of which were successful. Known as the criminal who could climb walls like a fly, he would make his first escape in January 1940. After scaling the roof of a new workshop, he threw a rope over a blind spot in the prison wall, climbed over, and rappelled down 25 feet. After a massive search that lasted 2 weeks, Halliday was recaptured at the end of a high-speed chase. His second successful attempt occurred in December 1946. This time, he scaled and rappelled down the same wall that he had in 1940, which is now known as Halliday's Leap. But this time, he went with 2 other men. In what was one of the greatest police hunts in Queensland history, Halliday was caught after only 4 days. When asked why he escaped yet again, he replied, "A man's liberty means everything to him. You can't blame a man for trying." When he left prison in June of 1949, he was determined to make a clean start. People usually remembered the tall, thin man with Peter, his bright-eyed black and tan Bitzer, which is what Australians call a mixed breed dog, a bit of this and a bit of that. Halliday had started his own roof repair business in Brisbane. Customer remembered fondly that his ever-loyal dog Peter would climb ladders to reach the roof where his owner worked. In January of 1951, Slim married Irene Close. From the start, the couple had a rocky relationship. While Halliday worked around the countryside, Irene was described by police as, quote, practically a common prostitute. Investigators found that just 2 days before Athol was killed, Irene left Halliday after a violent argument. They also found witnesses in Southport who, just days before the murder, saw Halliday and his dog Peter. With that, they felt they had all the evidence they needed. All they had to do was bring in Slim Halliday. When his mother-in-law and estranged wife were questioned, both gave conflicting stories as to his whereabouts, which cast further doubt on the man's innocence. Investigators would also find that the women were caring for a now ailing Peter. Finally, a month after the murder, Halliday was arrested in the outskirts of Sydney after attempting to rob a local store. The shopkeeper fought Halliday, and during their struggle, the convict's gun went off 3 times, striking him once in the leg and leaving him unable to flee the scene. He was quickly taken into custody. At trial, prosecutors wanted to make it clear that Halliday was their murderer by bringing Peter into court for witnesses to identify, but unfortunately, in the summer of 1952, Peter died from bites inflicted by paralysis ticks. Prosecutors would not be deterred by the dog's death, and after having Peter's body exhumed from its resting place in Halliday mother-in-law's backyard, they sent him to the Queensland Museum to be taxidermied for trial. This task was assigned to Don Vernon, a 36-year employee of the museum. The process was a long one, but after 2 weeks, on September 9th, 1952, it was completed, and Peter was placed into police custody, ready for his appearance at the trial. The trial itself began in December in Southport to a packed courtroom. As patrons fought for a better view, they saw the prosecution wheel in a covered box that just sat off to the side of the proceedings. During the hearing, Frank, the big fella bishop, testified that Slim had made Athol stop on Currumbin Hill with a pretense of relieving himself. He then stuck his pistol in the man's ribs and demanded his money. When Athol tried to flee the car, Halliday bludgeoned him to death with his gun and dumped the man's body in a nearby creek. He then took the car to the spot it was found. It's suspected that it was him that startled the homeless woman that crawled into the cab to sleep. In the end, Athol McCowan was killed over, quote, a mere £2. Halliday denied the prosecution's version of the story until detectives quietly pulled the sheet from the mystery box. When confronted with the sight of his beloved pet, Halliday began to grin happily, while his wife broke into tears behind him. After that, each witness who was brought forward identified the two, linking them both to the crime. By the start of March of 1953, Halliday's trial was over and a jury had found him guilty of the murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole back at Bogo Road Jail. Never one to give up, Halliday tried to escape 2 more times. In 1953, he set his mattress on fire as a diversion and tried to escape through the roof of the jail's workshop. He was caught after being overcome by the smoke. Then in 1959, he was caught in another cell block after bending open his cell door with an improvised pulley system. After that, his bed was bolted to a wall, and he suffered constant supervision and strip searches until he was paroled in the 70s. The last time anyone saw Slim Halliday, he had moved north to the town of Kilcoy, where photographers found him prospecting for gold with his new dog, Pat. Slim Halliday passed away after suffering complications from cancer surgery in 1987. Peter went on to have a strange afterlife of his own. After sitting in a box in storage for over 24 years, he was brought out as a permanent exhibit in the Queensland Police Museum. A favorite among curators and visitors, the stuffed dog took his place alongside other exhibits documenting the state's criminal history. Peter only leaves occasionally for exhibits and repairs, but is always returned to the museum that he now guards while greeting visitors on their way in. Case cracked. We would like to thank GetPocket.com, Wikipedia, BogoRoadJail.com, and police.qld.gov.au. Also, special thanks to Denise Cullen, who wrote an article titled The Gruesome and Heroic Afterlife of Peter the Dog. Her coverage was invaluable for this story, comprehensive and heartwarming. Please be sure to check her story out in the sources down below. Of course, as usual, I also want to give a big thank you to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's story. It's really interesting to me that it's a tip that actually cracks this case. We get the tip that lets people know about Slim Halliday's alias, and then that leads to him. But in terms of the trial, it really seems that it's Peter's appearance that drives things towards the conclusion and helps put Slim back in jail. So maybe Peter didn't crack this case in terms of solving the mystery, but I think Peter certainly did help uphold the conviction. There's also something about this story. Every now and then I bump into stories where I'm kind of charmed somehow by the actions of the criminal. And I know it's a weird thing to say because you're talking about a guy that senselessly murdered someone for nothing, for literally a few dollars. But there's just something about him trying to escape from prison over and over, and his statement just about how much freedom means to him. I think that's an interesting thing, in that when we're looking at these stories and when we're talking about other people, even if we don't line up with their lifestyle, sometimes there's things that we can learn from them in some way. And for Slim Halliday, I think the term "never gives up" really kind of rings through strongly. And I think that's something that, you know, if you're working towards good, it's a really good trait to have. Maybe if you're a criminal constantly trying to escape jail, maybe not the best trait, but maybe there's something in there that we can all learn from. For anyone in Australia that's interested in today's story, you can take tours at the Bogo Road Jail, and they include Halliday's cell and that wall that he used to escape the jail from twice, known as Halliday's Leap. We'll have a link to that in the description box down below. Trent Dalton was Slim's stepson, and he actually used his personal insights and life experience to write a fictional tale called Boy Swallow's Universe. It's a story about a boy learning all about the criminal life of his mother and his stepfather. We'll have a link to that in the description box below as well. A lot of different ways where you can take this story and dig into it in all kinds of different directions. So we just wanted to be sure to share as many links with you guys as we can for anyone that wants to do that. Certainly a very interesting story. A big thank you to PayPal supporters Jean Carew, Jennifer Wilson, Rita Maria Wanninger, Michael Park, and Mark Witt. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit www.lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for PayPal, sign up for Patreon, or buy merchandise. All of it helps keep me here doing what I love doing, learning about justice, how to keep ourselves and our families safe, sometimes being inspired in unexpected ways, and of course, spending time with you. I'll be back on Wednesday with a brand new episode of Searchlight right here on the Lord and Arts channel.